Welcome to Wellness for Entrepreneurs, where we have meaningful conversations with founders. This podcast is about exploring, educating, and empowering entrepreneurs on maintaining wellness in their entrepreneurial journey. My name is Matebe Jobo, and I am an entrepreneurship investor, scholar, and evangelist. I am your host. We are in the fourth industrial revolution, and many entrepreneurs who are not necessarily technology entrepreneurs are having to think about using technology in their businesses. But what are the different things that entrepreneurs should be thinking about to help them gain competitive advantage in their businesses? This is Wellness for Entrepreneurs, episode 12. In this episode, we talk to Lindelwa Skenjana, who is a digital adoption strategist, on how entrepreneurs who are not necessarily technology entrepreneurs should be thinking about using technology to transform their businesses. Lindelwa has a master's in ICT for development from the University of Manchester. She has worked with many companies in helping them with digitalization. She was named in the Mail and Guardian Top 200 in her work in this regard. She has a bachelor's degree in industrial and organizational psychology. She is definitely the right guest to help us think through all the aspects about technology, both technically and emotionally. Lindelwa, welcome to the Wellness for Entrepreneurs podcast. It is an absolute honor to have you on the episode.
Thank you so much, Mateo, for inviting me onto your platform. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I hope I shed some light to your listeners. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's get right into it. Let us start with unpacking fundamental concepts in digitalization. This episode is really aimed at, simplifying digital technologies, the opportunities they present, and the changes that they bring. This is so entrepreneurs, like I mentioned, who are not necessarily in the technology space, can have a better appreciation of what we mean when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution or digital technologies. Please, can you unpack some of these fundamental concepts for us?
Sure, Matabe. I mean, I personally try to stay away from buzzwords, right? Because we see that, as different industries evolve, there's always the latest buzzword. So as you touched on, we live in a time, the knowledge economy. So where, the World Wide Web is quite ubiquitous as a resource. And some of those buzzwords I think you may be referring to are things such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, API ecosystems, which is a big one at the moment, how different systems talk to each other, virtual reality, augmented reality. I mean, the list is endless, right? And the point is not just being well versed and knowing this list of all these things, but I think as an entrepreneur, it's understanding what you need, why you need them, and how you get to use them and apply them in your organization.
That's awesome. I like the fact that, there is a list of these digital technologies, and it's not just knowing about, which one is which for the sake of knowing about it, but really thinking about it as a basket that you can use in your business to enable your own competitive advantage. So let us think about how we can help entrepreneurs from developing countries who may be behind the digital technology curve. Technology advancements have been led mainly by countries such as the United States and China. And yet, to maintain relevance, entrepreneurs from developing countries are having to either adopt these technologies or innovate using these technologies, such that they develop their own unique value propositions. How should entrepreneurs, mainly in developing countries, be thinking about emerging technologies such that they achieve a transformative experience versus incremental outcomes?
That's a fantastic question, Mateba, and how I'd also break it down is you're essentially saying as an entrepreneur in a developing country, I want to thrive in the digital age. Using technology, how do I do this? And I like the fact that you mentioned China, right? As well as India and Kenya. These contexts have thriving entrepreneurs and they are in developing contexts. So we have examples there already. But I think there are three key things for me that are important. The first is as an entrepreneur, you need to decide whether you are digitizing, certain operations in your business, right? That will effectively impact your business in a manner that will yield a positive income, right? We'll look into an example of that. The second is, do you want to digitize your customer journey, right? So how your customers learn about you, how they make contact with you, how they reach you, okay, is another thing you can think about. But I think the third and most important is for entrepreneurs to remember why they're in business, right? But you need to, those are the two key things is, are you using technology to enable what you're doing, or are you deciding to become a technological business, right? And an example I have is, for example, in the retail industry, if you own a fast food retail company and your staff normally takes orders using a notepad and a pen, and they walk to the kitchen and give the order to whoever's on the other side, who may hear or not hear the order, may mess it up. There's a lot of room for human error, right? Whereas if that waiter used a tablet, and that, that order went directly into the kitchen, and automatic, there was an automated way of checking it off when it was done, and then it lets the waiter know that the order is ready. There's a lot of time saved in that process. So, I mean, that's just an example of how you are optimizing, your business efficiencies, and you're saving time. So I think it's just key as the entrepreneur to think about what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I like what you're saying in terms of understanding, am I going to use technology to improve my operations? Or am I going to transform my business to be completely a technology-based company? I think that's a very important consideration for entrepreneurs, as you pointed out, because it is not an easy journey for entrepreneurs, especially who are not necessarily technology entrepreneurs, to think about technology as a fundamental component of their businesses, right? So now for a moment, I want to tap into your industrial and organizational psychology background for a little moment. So digital technologies can tend to be intimidating for entrepreneurs, especially those who grew up in a particular industry like farming, manufacturing, and others. What are the things that entrepreneurs can do to reframe digital technologies as presenting new opportunities in their minds? So for entrepreneurs with employees who may see digital technologies as a threat to their own employment, how do entrepreneurs take their employees on a journey with them as well?
Mm-hmm. Look, and I think the thing around fear, right, comes with any set of new knowledge, right? I mean, looking, back at, our initial varsity days, or, later to even having master's qualifications, any new set of information is overwhelming, but it's also dependent on how open you are to it, right? But also understanding and weighing the pros and the cons. So, I mean, even in my lived career reality now, it's important to phase digital and technological solutions, right? It's important to have a change management strategy and take both your staff and your customers on the journey with you. I was in India, in Bangalore, many years ago, when I was studying, and it was interesting because the farmers' literacy rates there are similar to that of the African context, right? But instead of having tools and systems that would intimidate them with lots of text and hectic jargon, what I think it was either Microsoft or SAP, what they did is they developed a system or a tool where farmers in different parts of the village could send each other photos, right? So if there was a pest that was currently killing the crop, or if another part of that region had a drought, they would just send photos with one word in the local language that was spoken. So it's those things, as well as, the entrepreneur that is the farmer that has workers and stuff. It's understanding, your audience, your staff, and what you want them to achieve. I think to what we touched on when we opened earlier as well is, what's the end goal, right? And then you decide on the piece of technology that's going to enable you to do that. But this thing around change management is actually a massive one. I mean, you have to school yourself as the entrepreneur or slash farmer in this example, and then you pass on the teachings and the learnings, right? I mean, if you know, you and I, Mateba, I have nephews. You have a young child as well. Using apps and stuff is going to be more native to them, right? Whereas with us, there's still a huge educational piece that goes with this journey. But it is a journey. It's not overnight, you know. So it's really important. Change management, but and taking people on the journey with you is a key part. Yeah.
Yeah. I like what you're saying, because even for me, as I started this podcast as well, I had to interact with a lot of different platforms. And even though I currently work in the technology space, it wasn't necessarily easy to navigate those platforms as well. So I also had to almost frame it in my mind to say, this is a piece of technology that can enable me to do X and Y, versus just looking at the technology and feeling intimidated from the beginning, you know. So definitely achieving the outcomes or meaningful outcomes in these entrepreneurs' businesses takes a lot of grit and resilience, especially then also having to deal with the aspect of change management and acquiring knowledge in terms of the technology piece itself. So how can entrepreneurs obtain feedback quickly, learn from failure, and eventually succeed, using digital technologies?
Mhm. So there's a quote I like, and I don't know who it's by. It says, fail fast and fail forward, right? Because we know that from great failure come great lessons, which then make great entrepreneurs, right? I mean, if you read any of the Richard Branson stories and or even Steve Jobs, you learn a lot. And one of the key benefits of digital innovation is the ability to execute, monitor, and evaluate things in real time, right? That's the beauty of what technology affords you, right? For example, I mean, with the Uber platform example, once you've received your goods or your Uber has arrived, one of the key things they ask you is about your experience, right? Were you satisfied? Is it good? Is it not good? Etc. Because that information is taken, which is then termed data, right? Or data analytics, which is literally, I've asked you something, you've given me feedback. How am I going to use, that customer verbatim to improve my service? And I've just used a technological piece of, software to enable me to facilitate that, right? So that's what's really important. And an example I make is that as an organization, or whether it's you're small, you're medium, or you're big, it's really important to continually be gathering this feedback from your customers. And there's multiple ways to do it, right? I mean, you get free Google Forms. You get Survey Monkey that you can use. One of the latest artificial intelligence / chatbot ways of doing it is WhatsApp for Business, where, I mean, you can tailor it to do many things, and getting feedback is one of those things you can use it for. So there's multiple ways, but if the space you're in doesn't allow for you to use all of those technologies, you can just do a phone call as well. But I mean, I think that's one of the great things about technological innovation, is the key thing around feedback, because that's how you improve on your service and what you're offering.
Yeah, so I'm very passionate about using data for feedback. In fact, one of the episodes we did on the podcast does exactly that. It looks at using data for feedback. But I think the point you're making around learning from that data and then eventually improving or tailoring experiences is actually very, very important, because then that's how you learn as an entrepreneur. And the great thing is, it doesn't necessarily require sophisticated technologies per se, but that you could use it with tools like Google Forms and SurveyMonkey. So that makes a lot of sense. Let's talk a little bit about digital transformation, innovation, and economic development. Please explain the relationship you see here and why this has inspired you so much. Developing nations are not short of problems. What are the other elements that need to be in place to help entrepreneurs use technology to solve some of these problems?
Also, such Fancy and big words, Mateva. Digital transformation, innovation, and economic development. Before I get
Yes.
in,
That's why
before
you're
I
here.
get such fancy words. But before I get into that response, I actually read an article in The Guardian the other day, and it referred to how if Silicon Valley was a country, it would actually be amongst the richest countries in the world. Okay, so already that tells you what technology can do for a country's GDP. And the second fascinating thing for me is 4 of the top 5 most richest people in the world are technological entrepreneurs, right? So Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk. So that also tells you something about how, whether, again, you're a technology business or you're a business that uses technology for, to optimize, the efficiencies, you definitely playing at an advantage there. So I think there is merit to the relationship between innovation that seeks to digitally transform industries, has an impact on economic development. And how does it? Through job creation, through skills development, and what you then export to the world, right? And I feel the Americas of the world have had the blueprint for a while, right? So even how, when we think about Ford, right, and Henry Ford, and how in organizational development, he was the first, to use machines for things that people were using. Okay, so it's just interesting that it's been happening. America's had the blueprint for a while of how digital transformation, innovation impacts economic development. It's there, we know it. But I think that's definitely, I mean, those examples speak to how it helps.
So I hear the fact that Silicon Valley has gotten it right,
Mhm,
right, and that they've been able to export that to the world.
mhm,
But I want us to talk about how we can help entrepreneurs who are feeling either left behind, right, by the technology curve and digital transformation,
mhm,
or they're still very much locally based. They don't necessarily have global impact. How should these
mhm,
entrepreneurs be thinking about using technology, not just for their domestic market, but also for the global market? You know,
mhm,
what are some of the barriers in thinking that limit the ability of some of these entrepreneurs to expand their businesses globally, even with the use of technology?
mhm. So, and sorry, something I didn't touch on in the previous question that you had asked is that I think again, we're living in a globalized, global economy, right? So I think when you think, especially now with the advent of COVID as well, you need to just think about your customer, right? Mataba, I really think geography has nothing to do with it these days. But when we speak about, the developing context and some of the limitations, I think the fundamentals are not in place. I think they're there in drips and drabs, but it's not homogenous yet. So I think, especially, I mean, when I think of South Africa more specifically, literacy is all good and great, right? But if you put a piece of technology and connection, and someone isn't able to consume and decipher and understand, that's a massive problem, right, in itself. And that intimidation you and I spoke about earlier. So I think literacy is definitely one of the key problems. Then followed by access and affordability, right? So now I know about, Wi-Fi technology, and I can push notifications to customers that may be interested in my product, whatever. But if you don't have access to those tools and devices, again, what good is it you knowing about it? And affordability, introducing technological innovation or digital into your business, I mean, such as your brand as well, doesn't it comes at a cost, it comes at a price, and you need to factor that in, right? Again, I mean, you've got input resources depending on your business that you need to factor in. You may have staff that you need to consider. There might be a logistics pillar to your business or whatever it is. So affordability as well becomes another key thing. And I think this is an oldie but a goodie, PPP, partnerships, right? How are digital, technological, private sector organizations working with academia to take complex business or technological concepts to decipher them for different layers and types businesses, etc. And you get all of these SMME hubs and funding agencies. Is there an ecosystem for how all of this is operating? Or is it still, I'm a development fund agency and I do SMME, I write papers on it, and and I provide the technology. How is that ecosystem coming together to address some of those inhibitions?
The fact that, ecosystems need to enable innovation in general, so innovative thinking, simply because of the synergies that exist amongst different type of players. So that's very important. So, we've been talking about this, particularly, in South Africa, we've been talking about bringing the innovation ecosystem together, the entrepreneurship ecosystem together. Some countries have done it really well, others have not. I see that, for example, Switzerland is rated the most innovative country in the world right now. And so what are the things that we should be doing, actually, that governments should be doing to enable innovation, but also enabling entrepreneurs from developing countries to get ahead of digital transformation, because I think being an adopter of technology is one thing, but also learning to get ahead of the technology innovation curve is very important, for all the reasons you've mentioned around economic development and so forth. I mean, we've mentioned this before. We've had these conversations around ecosystem development. Where could we be missing this in South Africa or in other developing countries?
I'm going to tap into my ICT and development knowledge, because context is important, right? And you recall my thesis. And because there's actually three layers, contextual layers, right? So technology can impact and influence you at a meso, micro, or macro level as an individual. So what technologies are you consuming on a day-to-day basis? How are you impacting the technology world? How is it impacting you, vice versa? That's the micro. And then the meso level is institutional corporations, and it's the national policies, right? Because I mean, if you look at the China example as well, where they don't allow certain things or whatever. So already the ICT policies, etc., are limiting or creating the space you can play in as an individual or an institution. Then the macro level is the world and the globe, right? And I think we're privileged as well in some parts of the continent to be exposed to more. We're exposed to Chinese technological brands, American ones, and you've made reference to the Swiss and etc. etc. So we need to take cognizance of the contextual layers. But I think when it comes to governments and what could be done, access to knowledge is really key, right? Again, during my India visit, because we visited the ICT ministry and the education ministry and other private sector companies, and the minister or the colleague from the ministry had shared that they've introduced technology and business primary school. Why aren't we doing? I mean, I've known this for over 10 years now. Why haven't we done that? Right? Why is it that only children whose parents are in business get exposed to business and business practice or even technology, right? Why aren't we ingraining it? I mean, we're on the continent, we're going to have the largest, youth component in the world that's going to be consuming this stuff. But why aren't we ingraining that already now with everything we know, right? Firstly. The second thing is, I think, is around lack of exposure to how others in your respective fields are disrupting industries using technology, right? I mean, one of the craziest things being Airbnb, because before the guy did it, everyone was like, why would someone want to give their house with all their furniture and bedding for someone to come stay at it? But a confident child who knows that their economy, their families, the community will support their idea, right? It's not crazy. It's an enabling environment and now it's a global phenomenon. Of course, it's taken a hit because of COVID, but this thing around lack of exposure to how others are disrupting their spaces is problematic as well. Then the third, again, is around access to technology, right? You need access to the devices, to systems, to connectivity. And then another thing that we hardly ever touch on is having a consistent coach, right? I mean, in your example, Matebe, you were able to read up on different podcast systems and decide which one may be good for you, right? But someone else may need someone to guide them and say, okay, maybe don't do that, try that one, maybe try this one, or this one is more expensive, but these are the long-term benefits, etc. You know, so having a consistent coach, you know, to help you. So when and also ensuring that your customer also knows that you're available digitally online, because at the end of the day, you aren't, as an entrepreneur, taking on you know, a technological advancement, or, you know, taking advantage of this 4-hour time because you feel like it. It's all about, again, how you service your customer, or how your customer, you know, reaches you. So I think those are some of the things.
So you mentioned the concept of, you know, the technologies we expose ourselves on a day-to-day basis. You know, people logging onto Facebook may not necessarily realize that on Facebook, you could either update your status, which is probably the normal thing to do, but you could also use Facebook to make money, you know, to generate income. In fact, you know, and reach a wider audience. And this is not an ad for Facebook, but typically, you know, using that platform, you have access to a diverse number of people across the world. It serves the purpose of, you know, reaching more customers, being available to your customers. I think that's a very important shift in mindset, you know. And I think you mentioned something around just the cultural effects of a child, particularly in South Africa, growing up with a particular set of parents, but having access to technology versus other children. And I think obviously in our case, you know, there's a lot to think about. There are the socio-economic elements to it. But I think over and above the socio-economic elements to it, there's a concept of culture. You know, I think we're not seeing, you know, access to devices or tablets or etc. as a means to gain education. But we're seeing it as a means to gain quick money, in a sense that, you know, if I sell it, I'll get X and Y. And hence, that's why it gets mainly stolen. So I think, you know, even thinking about the culture shift that needs to happen in our country to see things like devices as enabling businesses to thrive, our kids to do well in technology is very, very important. So I just wanted to highlight that point there. I think you mentioned around making sure that you are not just innovating for yourself per se. You're not doing it necessarily because you feel like doing it, but you're doing it for your customers. You're doing it because you had a particular vision, you know, when you started, and so you want to achieve that vision. What are the practical tools that you can suggest for entrepreneurs to think deeper? You know, I think it's obviously starting to experiment with a couple of technologies makes sense, you know, having online presence and so forth. But what are those practical tools that can help entrepreneurs think a lot more deeper? Because I think the customer component is great, the operations enabling is great, but at which point do you create the perfect recipe for disruption and competitive advantage? So what are those practical tools? I know, you know, some scholars point to, you know, design thinking, etc., as a practice or as a framework. You know, so just given that somebody's coming from farming or manufacturing and they've started playing around with, you know, a couple of technologies, what are those practical tools that you can suggest for them to think about using technology in a more competitive way, such that they're able to sustain their competitive advantage?
And I mean, Matebe, look, if I had all the answers, I would also be a Jeff Bezos where I'm sitting, right? So this isn't exhaustive, right? The first thing, which I also apply in my personal capacity, is research, right? And research requires your time, it requires a device, it requires a connection, right? I think that's the most rudimentary thing you need to do, right? And I think the second, which I touched on earlier, right, is are you researching, you know, about a piece of digital technology to enable your business, or do you want to be a digitally, you know, a platform-based business? What is your end game? right? And also, you know, researching around the terminology you and I spoke about. There's also things such as geo marketing and geo targeting, which is linked to, you know, things like search engine optimization, which could purely mean, again, if you have a Fed cook business in the corner of a street, right, in Santon or wherever, and people Google craving Fed cooks, right? How do you make sure that you're the first person, whether you have a container or a building? How do you ensure that your name is at the top of that Google search response? And that's essentially what is meant by search engine optimization, right? And what I like, and again, this is not a Google ad, is that Google has a Google for Business 101. I think one of the talks I've gone to, they spoke about it, where there are tools that can help small businesses, putting your address of where your business is, so that if someone does search and they go on maps, you're a legit business that exists, etc. So there are tools that are free and readily available, you know, to validate your existence as an organization, right? And I think another thing to note is decide which parts of your business would be better digitized, right? You know, so for example, instead of hiring someone that's going to do your social media for you, there are tools such as HubSpot and Hootsuite, and I forget the others that are free, where you can be like, okay, I actually want to do a social media post on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on Instagram on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, right? So you can come up with your post and put it in one of these tools, and it actually does it for you. And what's great about these tools is then it also gives you a report, right? It can give you a report to say 5 people liked this one, 3 people reshared this post, etc. And then those are the people, speaking about data, you target, right? Then I could be like, oh, Matebe and Lindelwa liked my post. I can actually send them direct emails, you know? And I think earlier we touched on things like Google Forms, Microsoft Forms, SurveyMonkey, if it's around getting feedback and surveys, etc. A non-complicated example of artificial intelligence and chatbots is WhatsApp and WhatsApp for Business.
I want to pick on something you said just now, and I think you mentioned it twice already. So in terms of, do I just want to use technology to enable my business, or do I want to be a technology company or a technology platform company? In your view, do you think all businesses, given the fourth industrial revolution, are going to end up as platform companies or technology companies?
That's a very interesting question. And in trying to answer it, I'm going to say this, which is what my boss's boss's boss likes to say, is that the needs of the customers haven't changed, right? So if I still feel like takeouts or takeaways, right? Or I want to watch a movie or whatever, that my need hasn't changed, right? But how the takeaway gets to me has changed. And the more positive that experience, right, the more accurate my Uber delivery is, or if they give me discounts, and the more I'm going to keep using that digital platform, right? My need for watching movies or watching new content hasn't changed. But whether it's on Netflix or Showmax or Hula or whatever is what's changing, right? So I think more than it being, I think it's just about the disruption of the industries, as opposed to we're leaving that, we're moving away. Because at times, Matebe, I don't feel like having takeouts at home, and I want to be out at a restaurant and a different, so there's a need for that. And we're different, the same person can feel for different things, right? So how much more in a world where there'll always be different people? Friends of mine who traveled to Japan were telling me how fascinating it was that when you go to the loo in Japan, everything's automatic, right? It's like the thing flat or whatever, which is great. It's a great experience, but they were also sort of attached to when they're home, actually interacting with the. So I think they'll always be hybrid, you know, existences. But I mean, yeah, but according to movies and stuff, in the future, everything's going to be touchscreen and everything. But I think with where we are, these will coexist for a very long time.
No, but I like exactly what you're saying in terms of the customer's needs are still the same. So it just talks about the humanity aspect of technology. But what matters to me is, even though I may have the same needs, is about the experience. This is very important for entrepreneurs to digest, because then this starts to push you in the direction of competitive advantage. Hopefully, even by 2050, we still want to eat, so eating will still be there. But I think it's about how that experience comes together. Am I now going to be able to, for the people that care about climate change, am I now going to be able to trace the very potato that is sitting in my plate, that is now my chip, back to, the farmer that made it? And, could I actually say, can I give that farmer feedback, given that this has traveled a long way to get to me? So I think that's the really beautiful part about technology. The human needs are still going to be the same. The connection is still going to be the same. It's interesting, actually, even during COVID, during many lockdowns, that people still had the need to connect. But instead now that we're having Zoom parties and Zoom weddings and that sort of thing. So it still speaks to the need for human beings to still be human, and I think as we think about technology, that's actually a very useful lens of looking at it, because we are still human at the end of the day. So that's really great, and I like that. In closing, I am still interested in how developing countries like ourselves can think about augmenting our own path to development, whatever development is, but augmenting our own path to development and empowering entrepreneurs to really unleash their creativity, and making sure that they have a chance to lead the next revolution. What are your parting shots? If a government person had to pick up this episode, what would they hear from Lindelwa?
Look, I'm really passionate about the idea of information and communication technology being a key part in augmenting the African story and the African reality, right? And again, so some repetitions here. Technology and business courses need to be available from primary school levels across all schools, right? Education is not a privilege, it's a right. And I mean, there should be cross-functional, education, right? So if a suburban teacher is teaching the entrepreneurship course, why is that not readily available to a village school or a township school, right? So, but technology and business courses need to be a non-negotiable, available from primary school levels. Second, free crowd-sourced entrepreneurial content. Again, so it doesn't have to be fancy theory that's master's theory, right? How are you using pictures? How are you using text? How are you using videos, right? Across different industries for entrepreneurs that are on different levels, etc., to spread information as widely as possible in all different languages as well. And I mean, I'm not close to this, but the third would be the Department of Small Business should really prioritize the ubiquity of such knowledge, right? And again, it's old, but it's clearly not reached its peak. Private-public partnerships. How are private sector technology companies partnering with academia and then partnering with these SMME hubs and development funding agencies? How are we more intentional, as a nation around all of this? Instead of, I don't know, we shouldn't be obsessing around policy and policy work and where's the evidence, the outputs, the execution? Where are we learning and iterating, failing fast and failing forward? So a lot more evidence around that.
Awesome. Lindelwa, thank you for being a guest on this episode. I've learned a lot from you. So to our listeners, please reflect on what we've spoken about. What are some of your underlying conceptions about technology? And how are you using it to develop new value propositions in your business? Please leave your comments in the box below. Thank you. Thank you for being part of the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Matabe. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you for listening to the Wellness for Entrepreneurs podcast, a space for meaningful conversations with founders. Please click on the link below to subscribe and follow us on our social media channels. Goodbye.